Yeah, like I said, so you had nothing to do except for to watch this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
So you did have to, I guess, not read an article, but you did have to watch something and then think to make sure you have something to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's nice about watching a movie is it's a bit more. Well, yeah, it's depending on the movie. It can be a bit more passive. You were going to say
it's a bit more enjoyable. What is it?
Welcome. You are entering a strange realm. A realm of what ifs. What if movies, television shows, and video games were better, worse, bizarrer, or downright different? What might they look like? Find out on today's episode of CineCasters.
Hello, and welcome to CineCasters, the show where we watch movies and we deconstruct them and we put them back together and analyze them and figure out what could have been done differently or how we could imagine them differently to maybe improve them. I don't know. That's for you to decide. But it's a lot of fun. And go ahead, jump
make
in.
Them stronger in our opinion.
In
right?
our opinion,
relative.
Exactly. It's all relative. It's all subjective. I am Nate Draper, and I'm joined as always by my very good friend Janglez.
What up, my dudes?
And this week we are doing I believe it's 2013 film Ender's Game.
Ender's Game.
Which I believe, I actually know very little about it. I believe it's based on a novel, like a young adult novel.
Yeah, I believe it's based off of a really, really famous like science fiction novel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have something
which
to
I haven't read, obviously.
I haven't read it, and I'm pretty sure you haven't read it.
No.
Okay. I have to admit something. I picked this movie by mistake.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sad that we watched it. I'm not sad that we did it, and I'm happy that we wound up on the same page because we have had one incident where we wound up both watching different movies by accident.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
That was funny. But no, I hadn't meant Ender's Game. I had meant Ready Player One.
Oh. Okay.
But the game at the end of Ender's Game, like in the title, had made me think that it was Ready Player One. So I thought we were going to be doing Ready Player One because I thought that was what it was called. I haven't seen either movie. So I watched Ender's Game and I was like, I started it. I was like, this is different from what I imagined. And then I was like, oh, this is not the movie I meant. However, it is the one that I watched. So.
Okay, good. That's good that we both watched the same one.
Yes.
Okay, but that's funny.
I know it's funny because I was like, this doesn't seem like what I thought it was going to be, but I watched it anyway. So I will admit that I had meant Ready Player One. However, we watched Ender's Game, and this is the episode on Ender's Game.
Okay, so I can blame you for my 2 hours of having watched Ender's Game instead of...
Yeah.
Because, it's funny. I actually, at a certain point, obviously, okay, I didn't know enough to know that you were thinking Ready Player One, but at a certain point I was like, I haven't seen Ready Player One, and I was like, hey, Ready Player One, that might be another one
I think that's the one we should do next, because clearly that's the one that I meant. Anyway.
Okay.
So Ender's Game. We're on Ender's Game.
Yes.
What were your goods and your bads for Ender's Game?
Okay. I'll go with the goods first, as I usually do. I think, okay, there were obviously conceptual things that I thought were interesting, some design stuff. I think really to me the part where I went, okay, now there's an interesting quandary here, and that's when he's basically realized that that the whole thing was the simulation was not a simulation, and he's killed all this like species, and now he has to reckon with that. I think the idea was interesting. The problem, the thing is, it didn't. I don't think it worked based on where it came in the movie.
It happens so late in the movie. So if that's what you want your movie to be about, then you really need to explore. Like that needs to happen. Maybe like it needs to be your third act twist, or it needs to be your halfway point, so we can like build up this war, and then do halfway and be like, now you have to deal with all the ramifications of what just happened. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there were other things too that I thought. So I just recently read Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish.
Ah, great one.
And so reading it, I was like, oh, it's kind of like in Discipline and Punishment when he's talking about like how people are individualized and people are compartmentalized, and then they can't really interact with each other, and it's a militarized system. And I mean, it's all, it exists in so many different forms in different movies, but I was obviously looking at it, having recently read it, looking at it.
Well, Discipline and Punishment, particularly in terms of like a military organization.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Hugely,
Well, because in Discipline and Punish, in Punish, he talks about how a lot of those kind of like those models of incarceration and punishment are really derived from a militarized system. A system for efficiency in a military is really what informs a lot of those institutions. And so for me watching it, I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of like it's actually there are a lot of parallels, whether they're intentional or not. They do exist, which I think is interesting. So that was certainly a component to it that I was looking at it that way, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That was kind of it for me.
I actually came at this from a different point of view. I had like a different philosophical idea that I ran with it, but I'll get into it when I do my pitch, because otherwise it ruins kind of the effect of my pitch. But it basically had to do with the idea of playing a game, and because the fact that it's Ender's Game, and they keep bringing this up, this idea of playing, this idea of a game, this idea and changing the rules. And so I really played with that. I was like, I want to do something with that. So when I did my pitch, I really pushed for this idea, and then I added it to a certain individual's philosophy, but we'll get to that, because as soon as I say it, you're going to know exactly who it is and where I went with it. So
funny.
So I'm not going to say it. I'm going to leave that as a dangling carrot for those who wish to listen to my pitch. But the things that I did like, I thought Harrison Ford was actually an interesting villain. I think he does I think as any of the actors in this, he does the best job, because he gets enough screen time to really justify his performance. It's interesting to see him, and I think his casting is actually a good choice in this, because when you cast Harrison Ford in a science fiction, immediately you go to Han Solo. And Han Solo is genuinely a good guy. He's a rebel, but he's a he's a rogue with a heart of gold, right? That's the idea. In this, he's the primary antagonist, both for Ender and for like the overarching story, but he's also a victim of like his position in the militaristic organization and world that we kind of see in this. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting to see how he has like certain preconceptions, and yes, he's our primary antagonist, but it's also like how much of the propaganda that we believe about the Formicates or whatever they're called, the aliens, how much is he like a part of this system as well? Because he clearly has to answer to the whatever they're called, the commanders, the parliament or whatever,
the people in charge.
The people in charge. He clearly has to answer to them. So it's an interesting way to see how we only see the effects of him him controlling his cadets, including Ender. But I do think, like, as a villain, he does give a pretty good performance. It's interesting to see what happens. Because there's a lot of really famous people in here, and he was the only one that I really thought gave a genuine performance. I like Asa Butterfield as an actor, but I don't think he does a great job. I think the dialogue is pretty stunted, especially at the beginning. Abigail Breslau's in this.
I thought the dialogue on a whole wasn't.
Not great.
There were a lot of things performance wise that.
That's why I thought Harrison Ford's performance was the only one I really, really got.
What about? I actually thought Viola Davis was okay. Like.
Oh yeah.
In terms of what she did, like unfortunately, there wasn't a lot
for her. There's not a lot for her to do. She's just sort of there for Harrison Ford to have someone to bounce off of. But like
I think
Abigail
in terms of how she brought it to life, she did the like. I found her portrayal as convincing as it could have.
As it could be. But I was like, Abigail Breslau was in this as Valentine Wiggins, and I think Abigail Breslau is a wonderful young actress. She's done some great things. Particularly in Maggie, which I think is an amazing performance. But I really don't. I think she's basically just used as motivation for Ender, and it's cheap. It's a cheap use of her. It does nothing for her.
I felt that about pretty much every character. They were all kind of flat.
Because Haley Steinfeld is in this, and she's into
very talented.
She's hugely talented now, right? Not only in just like the Marvel stuff, but we've seen her do like more television. True Grit. I was also thinking of Dickinson, where she plays Emily Dickinson.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, yeah.
like she's clearly quite talented. Again, Asa Butterfield, maybe not the most talented, but his work in Sex Education most recently has been quite fun. Like it's comedic, but he's still dramatic. Like I don't know, maybe it's just because they were that young. I felt like I would want to hire actors who are maybe a little bit older, because these kids feel like they're 12.
Yeah, I think that's but I feel like that's kind of the idea. The idea is it's sort of like playing with the idea of child soldiers.
Yeah, and they did dangle that in front of us a little bit. They did say, like, child soldiers is outlawed, and he's like, well, we're at war and it doesn't matter. Like, and it's like, that's an interesting idea. Why aren't we talking about that? Why isn't this the premise of the movie? Like, really, exactly. The villain, like the aliens, I shouldn't even say the villains. The aliens in this movie are basically just a set piece. They're not really necessary right up until the end. We don't really interact with them at all, and we'll get to that ending.
Yes.
But I really honestly think, like, if you just needed something to go to war with, then it's a perfect background, and then you should explore things like child soldiers, things like the nature of discipline, punishment. In a lot of ways, this is like a shittier version of Dune, because of the dreams, and Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking I was like, I had written, that was the first thing I wrote down. It's like, this is just a less good Starship Troopers.
Yeah, but then he starts talking about like how they're in his dreams, and I was like, oh, it's like or it's like a shittier version of Dune, because I've been doing a lot of research into the music of Dune lately.
Oh, okay.
And the beginning of Dune, we get that like Shadakur, or however you pronounce them, the chant, and it's like the throat singing, where it says like dreams are
messages from the deep or something like that.
Yeah, dreams are messages from the deep. Yeah, and it's done in like the chant like that. Yeah. And it's like really, really cool. So I've been doing a lot of research into the music of that, and so when they talk about, oh, they're trying to connect to me through my dreams, and I was like, okay, this is like shitty Dune. But you're right, it is like shitty Starship Troopers in that, like, we're dealing with bugs, but it doesn't ask nearly as much of the same smart questions as Starship Troopers did, even though Starship Troopers plays itself like this. I mean, we talked about that whole movie, how it plays itself like this whole campy propaganda, serious, stupid satire, surrealist version of whatever the fuck it's trying to be, in the smartest, dumbest way possible.
You know what? The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced it's actually a brilliant movie.
I think it's a brilliant movie. I love that movie. Yeah. I think it's better than the book. This, on the other hand, I have a feeling the book is better.
Right. Yes.
And I think I haven't read the book, but I think like feel like that revelation would come across harder in the book than it does in the movie. I mean, as soon as they started talking about photorealistic simulations, I was like, this is all false. Like, they've set this up so that you're constantly questioning what your commanding officer is doing, because they're constantly like, oh, Ender has a problem with authority, and in the end he's justified, so it makes sense to me. So it's not as though there's a bad arc there. I just don't think it's really all that well done, because we seem to focus too much on like on simple things like Ender becoming a good commander, or it just feels very middle school.
Yes, I think that's it. A lot of the like, it's hard to figure out like where, because you see the seeds of those questions there. You definitely like, okay, going back to the whole simulation thing. To me, it was very obvious, like very early on, that okay, this is like, they've set it up that these simulations are actually real.
100%.
So when that reveal comes, you're kind of like, well, duh. But I also feel like it's a fine line between a plot twist being predictable and feeling like inevitable, and also having the full weight of it. Like, I think even every plot twist is inevitable on some level, but I think because it comes so late, it just feels like you're dragging it out, and you're kind of, the whole thing is hooked on that twist being like a reveal.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were saying, I think in terms of some of those things, in terms of like the development and the arc along the way, you're right. Like, the questions that they're asking are like, well, why, like, how do we make him a leader? And they fall in these very like cliched expressions of how that's supposed to be. Like, oh, he takes charge and he's able to now like beat up the bad guy. And so like on one level, it could have, maybe if it was done with a bit more like irony, you'd go, oh, okay, it's we see how it's a comment on this society's values of leadership, for example, or it's a comment on this society's way in which it's molding the characters. But well,
that's why I thought it was interesting. They constantly have this dichotomy where Ender doesn't want to resort to violence, but it seems to me that he keeps talking about how the decisions that he's being given are forcing him to resort to violence. Like we sort of played with that as well, and I was like, that's an interesting idea. Like they want him to have a strategy developed so that the enemy will never fight him again, right? The enemy will never want to attack again. In order to be preventative, right? And there's a whole ethics of war there, right? Should you strike first in order to, make some casualties on your enemies,
right.
Even on innocent people,
right.
But does it stop a larger war where more people might die, right? So there's some ethics
it's
there.
Game theory to some extent, too.
And that's something that certainly could have been brought up. It's not brought up in this movie. That's something that certainly could have been brought up. But it's interesting to see, like, are they trying to force him into positions where it's like you have to make decisions that result in violence in order to win, to get the outcome that they want, versus Ender's constantly like, can I win this battle without violence? Can I win this battle without... And we see this. He's constantly trying. And this is where I think it's cheap, but I think where Valentine and Ender's older brother Peter come in handy is... that there is this dichotomy. He wants to be compassionate like Valentine and not aggressive and violent like Peter. It's cheap. It's reductionist down to their two basic characteristics, but it as a quick representation of things that Ender could be, it's effective. Right? And so I think we see this played against this. They want him to be violent, but strategically violent, whereas he wants to be compassionate, but strategically compassionate. But again, it's a theme that's there that's not played out particularly well.
Yeah, exactly.
I also felt like the thing where they're in like the 0G battle, like that's that game thing that they do, is really interesting and fun, and I see how it plays into the overarching story and plot that shows Ender learning to be a fighter and then a commander and then like a real leader. But it also just feels a lot like Quidditch.
Yeah, it's not really necessary.
This is fun, but it's unnecessary.
It is. It's completely unnecessary. It doesn't really, like, the whole... I think there's... I get the feeling that in the book, a lot of these things make more sense because in a book, you have the opportunity to have these long digressions where it's like in Quidditch, like in Harry Potter, it's basically like, all right, now we're going to describe Quidditch. And it's this fun thing and it's all world building. And in a novel, you can get away with that.
And often you should have a moment where it's like, hey, that last chapter was a huge revelation about, Ender's emails are not getting through and he really needs his sister, right? He needs that emotional support. And so we get this big revelation about like his character growth. Now we need a chapter where it's him like, oh, this is something that's happening at Battle School that builds the world and shows Ender being a good leader, but it's sort of just fun and divergent.
Yeah,
diverting,
exactly.
I should say. Yeah.
And the thing is, I think where it kind of feels like it's a distraction is because at the end, like ultimately, it's all about him running these simulations where they're actually conducting war.
Yeah.
It doesn't... I had a hard time seeing how him having to like sneak his way in and be manipulative and trying to win the favor of other people. Like, okay, I can see how that plays into his whole like development as a leader, but in terms of how it plays into him being very good at these simulations, that seems like a different skill. And you're right, they don't seem to quite... The way in which they're thread together isn't really... It's not really there.
It's like, honestly, it feels like the difference here is that Ender's Game really wants to focus on Ender's progression and character as he discovers like who he is and grows up and discovers like he's being lied to and all this stuff. Whereas Starship Trooper, to go back to that, was really about like how this whole society, centered around a group of characters, but how this whole society is indoctrinated and deals with this whole war in a very interesting and reflective look at it. But it's much more, they go into the academy, and apart from a few scenes into the academy, all of a sudden they've graduated. And I feel like if the point was to get to Ender realizing that he's being played in order to make the simulations feel real, so that he's only thinking about winning instead of thinking about casualties, then we should have gotten there faster. We should have moved through. Yeah, we can introduce Petra, we can introduce Bean, we can introduce these characters, but we need to get to command school faster. Because
exactly.
Otherwise, I mean, I understand we're supposed to get into Ender's psyche, but I feel like that probably played out better in the book, because I think this book is for young kids. I think this book is a young adult science fiction with some interesting ideas. I just don't know if those came across on screen very well. Yeah,
that's the impression I have. The other thing too that I felt was a bit of a leap was the way in which the video games that they somehow like the aliens are like communicating to him through the video game. I thought that was a bit of a leap.
Dreams are messages from the deep.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I didn't understand why video games were necessary to do that. Plus, the whole
because it's supposed to be his, like, it's like connected neurally. He's controlling the video game through his brain. So I guess the video game is built upon his like subconscious mind, and that's where the messages are coming from.
But why? But why introduce that in a video game is what I'm curious.
Yeah,
about.
I would have done
Especially
that in dreams.
Because the whole thing with the video game is they're supposed to be using it to like analyze him, and then there were moments in it where, and maybe it just wasn't clear to me that was how it worked. But I remember there's a moment where it's the game where he's got to like choose the poison. Yeah. And then he like jumps in the guy's eye, and they're like, wow, no one's ever done that before. And I was kind of like, really? Seriously?
Yeah, I feel like if you're given infinite options, somebody's definitely tried that.
Someone before. Okay, you have two options. They both are wrong. Someone at some point surely figured out there's another way you do this. And there were moments, there were like eyebrow raising moments where I went, really? That just seems, that's like the characters don't react in a way that I think any normal person would have reacted in that situation. The video games was just one example of that.
And the video game, it was also like, I understand it was supposed to look like a video game, but the CG was a little strange. We have better CG than that, but I think they were trying to make it look like a video game so that I kept it that way. But like, it just looked a little weird. I was like, why not do this? I don't know. It just seemed very strange to me.
Yeah, and I think the ultimate like narrative function it serves is to get him to go like, oh, I can actually communicate with these things, and I know that they have feelings, and now but that also just comes out of the blue, right at the end, and suddenly he's now like, oh, I just killed a bunch of things, and just 10 minutes ago I realized they might have feelings, so now I'm very conflicted.
That's what I thought. It was like they win, and then all of a sudden he's like, why are we seeing these images as like the entire planet like burns, and it's like and all of a sudden the music changes, and I was like, this is petty and cheap. Again, it's just like, we're going to make the music, and we never, all we see is the planet dying. We never see any of the insects dying.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, so just the music is being evocative, and it's like, this is dumb. And then he goes into the castle or whatever and finds the dying queen, and she like wipes his tear away. Oh my God. So stupid. I'm sorry. That's the part where I was like, what the fuck?
That was, when I saw that message from you, I went, oh, okay, I know. He's gotten towards the end. He got.
I didn't mind the ending where he was like, hey, Valentine, like, you're not going to hear from me for a while because I need to know if I'm as good at peace as I am at war. I actually thought that message was pretty good. I just thought the means to getting there was so, and he's like, I have precious cargo. That's so dumb.
I know. I think the reason for me it didn't work was because nowhere else in the movie do they ask that question. Like, hey, I mean, they do at one point. There's one scene where he's talking to one of the other characters, and he's like, oh, I wonder if maybe they have feelings, maybe they think like us. But it's brought up so late. Like, there's never really any question that anyone's wrestling with it until the very end, and so suddenly to drop this load on the audience and be like, oh wait, now maybe I feel bad about this. It seems so out of left field that
I wonder. You were talking earlier about how plot twists sometimes are inevitable. I wonder, like, a good plot twist I think should be foreshadowed but always left in question.
Yeah, okay.
Like something that you're like, oh shit, and then when you go back and watch it, you're like, no, it was there all the time, right? The Sixth Sense is the classic version,
like Prestige,
right? Or the Prestige. Yeah, the Prestige tells you what the answer is in like the first 15 minutes of the movie. It tells you what the answer is, and that's such good storytelling. And And so it's always set up, but when the twist happens, you're left going like, oh, it was there all the time. How did I not see it? Whereas in this, the twist happens, and it certainly is set up, but it's more of like as an audience member, I'm going, okay, yeah, but this, instead of being like, well, what if this? I'm going, it's this. This is what the twist is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like it should be, the way it should work is, even if you figured it out early on, once it's revealed, it's still a joy. Like, you still have some satisfaction in that moment.
Yeah, and the satisfaction isn't just, I was right. The satisfaction has to be like, this is well told. Like, there's a cathartic kind of like, this is well told. And even though I guessed it, it's still happening. And there's still like character fallout and emotionality and vindication.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about like, like a detective novel or a detective TV show, part of the thrill. The reason I'm thinking about this is because my parents have been watching some of the like BBC. They're kind of like cheap detective films, and I've seen some with them, but it's kind of fun. Because the thing is, while they are kind of cheesy and hokey, some of them are like Father Brown.
Oh, so
it's
good.
Kind of fun.
Yeah,
it's kind of fun to be like, oh wait, like who is it, and like who would it make sense to be, and if you get it right, you're like, yeah, I got it right. But part of it is the satisfaction of getting there.
Yeah,
is really what it's about.
And watching your characters get there.
Exactly. But if you're sitting there rolling your eyes and you're like, oh, come on, seriously, like none of you saw this.
Yeah,
that's a different thing.
I mean, they are 12. It's not working.
So. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it makes sense. Perhaps, but I think because everything else about it, it just seems like it's, like I said, it's hanging so much on like it trying to like, oh yes, I bet you didn't see this. And,
this is why I think the child soldier thing works so well, because when you realize like these, how could they not see it? How can they not see it? It's because they're 12 and they've literally been programmed to only think about like war and tactics and strategy. They've never had enough like education or critical thinking to question that maybe the propaganda being fed to them is just propaganda and how propaganda functions. Right.
That's why I was saying like that, like Starship Troopers. I was thinking at one point, I thought while I was watching it, maybe like an approach where it's kind of like showing you the propaganda.
Yeah,
it would make because clear like that was something that it made sense to me. Like later in the movie when like Ben Kingsley. Also, I have to say the Ben Kingsley character, it kind of cracked me up a little bit.
The Ben Kingsley character pissed me off a little bit.
Oh yes,
because I thought I was like, why the fuck would you make Ben Kingsley Maori? Or at least part Maori, and not just hire a Maori actor. Exactly.
Yes. I mean, like, cracked me up in a like very cynical, like, why did they do this? This is so kind of ridiculous.
So
it is, and I just started trying to I started imitating him, like the way Taika Waititi, like I imagined Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi playing this.
Yeah. Like crashed my ship into that bigger ship, and then it like exploded, and then they like stopped. And I was trying to, I just thought what I did. Yeah. Somehow his Ben Kingsley. Like
his accent is on point. It's just sort of like it's interesting to me to get a British actor.
Yeah.
Like when colonialism is so like in the zeitgeist right now. Let's get a British actor to play a Maori person. It's like, did nobody think that maybe that was a bit problematic?
I know. And when he's like, oh yeah, my parents were married, and I was like, oh come on, seriously? Who thought this was a good idea?
Yeah, really.
But anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, the scene where he he crashes the ship and it's like he ejected right before.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, that's the reveal? I was expecting it to be more like, this whole thing was made up.
Yeah, the whole thing's made up.
Okay, now we're going to show the like mechanisms of like, we're going to show the character how he's being deceived just enough.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I just hit eject.
Yeah. And they just cut it in order to make everyone believe he died. It's like, but why? What was the point? Did they need a martyr just so they could continue the war?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I get what they're going for, but somehow, again, it just didn't.
Just
somehow didn't land.
Yeah. I also, so the part where he like is like, I'm no longer gonna fight. He's like, I'm tired of being lied to. Ender, I mean. At the end, when he like finds out he just committed like mass genocide, and then he's like in the place with Petra, in the cell with Petra, and he just gets up and leaves. And I'm like, where's the security? Like, he just leaves and Petra follows, and they make it outside the facility. without anyone spotting them.
Yeah,
Then he
yeah,
goes to this castle thing, finds the queen with the eggs, which apparently nobody checked on before. Even though it's like literally adjacent to
no one thought to look in there.
the base. Yeah, it's adjacent to the base.
Yeah. Oh, we don't go out there. We need oxygen.
Yeah. So okay, fine, cool, but nobody checked it out. So anyway, he like then takes and then manages to get onto a satellite, take a ship, and then exit the satellite on that like ship. And nobody stopped him or asked why he was holding on to an egg.
It all makes sense. It all makes perfect sense.
Oh, perfect sense.
I know. Yeah, there was especially. It was kind of like, okay, yeah, that big twist reveal. Going, okay, I figured that out, and then suddenly he's talking to these giant alien bugs. And that was where I went, okay,
I'm out. Yeah,
this is just like, it's like we've stumbled into another movie.
It is. It feels like a different movie almost,
which sometimes can be very interesting.
Yes,
I mean, there's a movie called Something Wild, directed by Jonathan Demme. It came out in the 70s, and halfway through the movie, there's a genre switch. It goes from being this kind of like innocent like road movie comedy, and it suddenly becomes very dark halfway through the movie. But it's very interesting how it plays out, and it works. It lands perfectly. But it's very calculated.
Yeah, you have if you want to do that, you sort of have to like lead your audience in. Like I've seen movies that like I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that they start out like a comedy and then slowly turn into a horror as you like, but it like leads you in with the campiness, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, this isn't campy at all. But
exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, Cabin in the Woods is a similar
That was the
one.
example I was going to give, but it stays pretty satirical the whole time.
But it's clearly satire.
Yeah.
Another one this one's maybe a bit more like almost sudden. I don't think it technically works, but I really like it, is From Dusk Till Dawn.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
Oh, okay. It's George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino actually acting in it. Harvey Keitel's in it as well. Basically, it's like halfway through the movie. Do you mind if I spoil it?
Yeah, go for it.
Halfway through the movie, it's suddenly a vampire movie.
Yeah, I do know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Very suddenly, out of nowhere, it's a vampire
movie. Yeah.
But it's the thing is, these happen halfway through the movie. It's not like right at the end.
Yeah.
So you're still, and I think in the case of Something Wild, the part of the story is there's the characters you both that are like falling in love with each other, you get the sense that they're not being honest with each other.
Yeah.
So you already have this feeling that something's
that's what I'm talking about.
off.
You have to foreshadow your twist. There's got to be something.
Yeah. So in something, when it switches in the middle, you go, oh, like you're already ready. You're ready for it because you're already kind of expecting something to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And the same thing with From Dusk Till Dawn. It's basically like, they're going on this trip. They're going somewhere. You're like, okay, what's going to happen? But part of the movie, I think it is kind of a joke where it's like halfway through, they're like, okay, you think the movie is this. Well, now,
It's
vampires,
not.
ha ha ha.
Yeah.
But again, these are those are cases where the genre bending is, I think, intentional in that it's actually doing it. In the case of From Dusk Till Dawn, I think it is kind of just playing with genre
on purpose,
quite intentionally. Yeah. Whereas in this case, it's like it's still science fiction, but now it seems like it's kind of like a tacked on thing at the end to try and make the character.
Well, that was like
think about what they've
this
done.
is why so much of this feels like Starship Troopers. Like remember how they have the scene where they see the eyes of the brain, and it's sort of this really weirdly sympathetic moment as they like stab the brain brutally.
Yeah,
you have this and the music is kind of stirring and you're like, what the fuck? Like, are they feeling creatures? Like how much of this is? Why am I watching a propaganda movie about propaganda about the thing that I'm watching propaganda about? Again, that's how stupid that movie is and how brilliant that movie is. But yeah, there's those kinds of questions that are there, but they're left unanswered simply because that's the kind of movie it is. Whereas in this one, it's like, no, for sure they were feeling creatures, and we know that, but it's at the very end and. That's what the movie was about, I guess.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Exactly. Very, very strange.
I think we should get into some pitches.
I think we should get into some pitches. I don't think I have anything else.
No, we went over mine. The Ben Kingsley thing really pissed me off. The fact that there were so many great actors in this and they weren't utilized all that well, it was really kind of was really kind of annoying that way. Like Ben King, but
Yeah,
I mean, because
I know.
I already mentioned Abigail Breslaw and how she was basically just used as like motivation and not really an actor. I think that's irritating.
Yeah.
Even Haley Steinfeld doesn't really do much in this movie.
Terrific actors in this movie. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Haley
And
Steinfeld
Ben
doesn't
Kingsley
do much
also-
in this movie, but she is basically like, because I was happy they didn't do a romance plot. They hinted at it, but they didn't do like a romance plot, which I was happy about. But I almost feel like, against my own better judgment, I almost feel like if they'd given a romance plot to Ender and Petra, that she actually would have had more screen time and been a more important character, despite the fact that I don't like it when characters are only used that way.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Which is just such a non-character.
Yeah, well, I mean, so unfortunately, like pretty much apart from Ender and the Harrison Ford character, there's not really, like, none of the characters really do a lot, unfortunately.
And we don't get a lot of world building either. They talk about Ender being a third child, but that's not explained to us. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
I can intuit what that means, but I don't know what that means.
I feel like yeah. Well, maybe let's get into some pitches, because I feel like some of the like world building stuff, like to me, I think where I went was a little bit more of the world building to try and figure out some of the issues.
Oh, I streamlined. I went right into like, we're gonna make this movie about one thing and one thing only.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I sort of went like world building, as a means to go, like, just for me to like figure out, okay, like
what does this mean?
What's the because I thought the interesting direction to go was leaning into basically tricking children into thinking they're playing video games, and then discovering that those video games are actually
I kind of did the same thing too.
Violence. I was wondering, yeah.
How are you feeling about your pitch before?
I'm feeling mine's actually not super long.
Neither is mine, but
I went through kind of like bullet point, like just sort of broad strokes, but I feel like it was like, well, I don't mind going first.
Oh, I was gonna say, actually on this one, I don't mind going first either.
Okay.
So
I just want to guess, was the thinker for yours, was it Baudrillard?
It was not Baudrillard. It could have been. Okay. That's clever, but it was not Baudrillard. It was Slavoj Žižek.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Maybe I'll just get into mine now that I've spoiled.
Sure. Yeah. So now I have to know.
So my movie opens up with Ender playing a war game against another kid, and he's winning. But we also see he's being monitored. The other kid tells Ender that he's going to beat Ender physically or mentally. After monitoring the situation, General Graf and Vice Admiral Anderson, I think that's who she was, or I think she was a vice admiral, whatever, decide to see how he deals with rejection, and they terminate him from the program. But it's all part of the test. At home, his mother and sister are sympathetic to Ender, but his father tells him that failing is okay. He's like, I'm disappointed, but failing's okay because that's how you play. You know what I mean? In order to win, you have to risk, and the risk is failing, but it's important that you try. And the general shows up and tells Ender that his termination was actually the latest test in a program to see how he would deal with the rejection. And he's passed and is going to be launched into space. And he's also called out, like the same way that he was. He was like, I made you out to be like the Caesar or whatever. So Ender starts battle school and continues to email Valentine. Battle school is hard, and they're training their teams to play this game thing while they're also in school. But Ender has still been made the center of attention. Their training commander, Sergeant Dapp, says he'll explain any question. But when Ender asks questions, he's usually just reprimanded, and he's like told he has to learn what the rules are. He's also being monitored when he's playing the CGI game and gets frustrated when he discovers that both cups are poisoned, and he lashes out in anger. I'm not thinking he's like gonna jump into I'm thinking like he's physically gonna be like, this is stupid, and like rage quit. Right. He's gonna rage quit. Then he gets transferred to the Salamander team, where General Graf tells him this is because he's shown promise, so he's being put on a better team. But he's basically treated like crap by Bonzo, I think is the character's name.
I can't remember.
Yeah. But he does also meet Petra. After defying Bonzo's orders and earning his team some points, the way that he did in the movie, Ender is then promoted to his own team, Team Dragon, and he trains his squad. Eventually, they're called to a final round where they're ambushed. It turns out that there's two teams against them. It's Leopard and Salamander. And Ender was not told this. And the game was also started at 3 a.m. Ender was not told this either. But he manages to pull a victory out of his ass despite, being ambushed and whatnot, and not knowing anything. So Bonzo finds him in the shower, and Ender and he fight, and Ender chooses to let Bonzo go. He's like, I'm not going to fight you. But then two of Bonzo's goonies that were told to watch the door, they show up, and now it's 3-on-1.
Oh, okay.
And Ender again chooses to act out in violence, and he accidentally kills Bonzo. So Graf tells Ender that everyone knows it was a mistake, and of course that but Ender's never killed anyone before, so he's like kind of devastated by this. He's like, what the, like, I can't just kill. And he's like, what? That's what we're going to war for. You got to learn that's what war is. So even though that's what they've been training for, he's like, you're now like a real soldier. Ender wants to go home or at least see his family, but the general says that's impossible. And he's like, you've been keeping all my emails, like, and he's like, yeah, your family is a distraction, we're running out of time. But Ender was like, I want to see my sister. So he does go back down to Earth, but it's directly to go see Valentine. So he goes to see Valentine, and she says, like, you've got, like, even though this whole thing is happening, she also is given direct orders by Graf not to tell him what's happening on Earth, only to talk to Ender.
Okay.
So she says, it's like Dad always says, you might risk losing, but you always have to try. You have to try, right? Because in the end, you could achieve greatness. So he is promoted to command school. Here we find out Mazer Rackham is not dead, and that was all propaganda that's used to keep the soldiers, working. His martyrdom. He's not actually even really much of a hero. He's more of an asshole with a savior complex.
Oh, okay.
And while running the simulations one day, the team fails, and the commanders like Graf and Mazer Rackham, they come down really hard on all of them. And Ender is like, this is messed up. Like, why are you guys coming down so hard on us? And he doesn't know. He's like, I this doesn't make any sense. Like, why are you coming down so hard on us? So he begins to watch footage of different attacks to try and see like what's actually going on. So Petra was sad after Command came down so hard on them because they failed their mission, the simulation. And so she does some digging, and she finds out that the simulations aren't actually simulations, and but they're like real. And the failure was actually like, it basically cost them a whole fleet of real people, and that's why Command came down so hard on them, because
right.
They lost like a million people, just a million people. So Ender is told they have to accelerate the testing so that they can get them ready for the real war. But Petra's like, it's not like, we're already in the war. They're just lying to us to make us. And so he's like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I can't find any attack patterns. I can't find any like anything from these like aliens. I don't like what's going on here. And so he starts to look at the propaganda he's being shown, and he realizes like there's something really fishy going on here. So then he tells them that they're like, you have to. He's like, I don't want to do this simulation. I'm not doing the simulation of invading the home world. This is like, I'm not doing this. This is real. You guys are lying to us. They tell him he's the only commander who's capable of this. And he's like, we're not even really like, based on what I'm like looking, I'm keep seeing these flight patterns. There's no sense to it. We're fighting a war that isn't a real war. Like something about this doesn't make sense to me. And it's because he's like, something about this is a lie. I don't even think that I'm the only commander. I think there probably were and are others. Like he's basically, I'm tired of being lied to, and the homeworld invasion is real, and I'm not doing this. And then the commander, General Graf, reveals that it's actually not the homeworld. It's just a colony world, that they wanted them to believe it was a homeworld, and that the reason they wanted them to believe is because they needed them to think that they had won, but basically they don't want to. They know where the homeworld is. They don't want to destroy it because they want to keep the war going, so that they can continue to justify having child soldiers believe the way they want. And Ender is basically like, I'm not doing this anymore. So he defects and basically gets court-martialed. And several months later, we see Ender living by himself in a cabin in the woods. And General Graf drives in with Valentine and she takes him out on a boat. And she's like, the war is still happening. People are still out there. You had a chance to finish it. And Ender's like, no, the war is going on because people like General Graf want to keep it going. Every time, everything I ever did, they always changed the rules on me. They told me what to do, and then they never told me what the real rules were. So there's like this binary of trying in order to succeed, but only when you know what the goal is. By the entire time, the commanders were always just like pushing child soldiers so they could do whatever they want, but they were barely old enough to understand what war is. Like, we had no idea. War is not a game. This is not a game. And they were treating it like one. And the only way to win a game like that is not to play.
Right. There you go.
So he's like, I'm not playing anymore. I'm not going to be part of the military where they're constantly playing games of who outranks who and forcing me to go against bullies to see how I'll react. That's all a game. Military was a game. The training was a game. The war is a game. And I'm tired of playing a game where I can't win. So the only way to win is not to play.
Nice.
And he's like, I'm going to live my life out here in the middle of this lake, nice and peacefully, and that war can keep going. But I'm not playing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yours is that how it ends?
That's how it ends.
That's much more optimistic.
Well, it's actually not optimistic because the war is still happening. Ender hasn't done anything.
Well, I'll say it's more optimistic than mine.
Oh, well, I mean, I will go back to like, so this is idea that Zizek has about like not doing anything. Like,
right.
Like,
yeah.
I can't remember what it's called in Chinese, but they call it lying down.
Oh, okay.
Where like,
yeah.
if you can't
do not engage.
Yeah, it's
like,
just not engaging. So he basically, it's like the entire time the military is always like, you have these choices, but they're not giving all the information. And Ender realizes that if he wants to defeat the system, he can't engage with it.
Right.
So he chooses not to play.
Nice.
Especially, and I wanted to play with the idea that everything was a game. Game.
Mm-hmm.
Ender's game.
Yeah.
Ender's game.
I think that's kind of what the movie was trying to go for. Like the whole thing, like they do drill it in that he's, trying to get promoted, that he's trying to like outsmart everybody, that like these aren't your friends, these are people that you're basically in competition with. So I think that's a theme that's there.
And everything's always a game too. It's always like they're playing war games. Then they're doing the gate sport thing in Zero Gravity, which is also a game. The simulation is basically a game. It's always a game. It's never like real. It's always treated as separate. And I wanted that to be a little bit like propaganda. Like they're treating it like that's the propaganda. But I also needed this idea of like, how do you beat a game, right? Because I mean, like in video games, I use an analogy here, but like when he's playing the video game where they're monitoring him and he can't get over the poison, the best way to beat a video game is not to play it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're like, but then the game's won because if I don't beat the game, then the game's won. Right. Like I never beat it. And it's like, if you don't play the game has no power over you.
Yeah.
You cannot lose.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I have one more thing to say.
Okay.
This
I knew you were going to do your Zizek impression.
With ideology and this I love obscenities and I'm perverse.
I love movies. I love
being
science fiction. It's an excellent movie. You can't see it, but we're also doing all of Zizek's tics physically.
Oh yeah,
as well,
we're like
so touching it. Yeah, smart man, but man, he can meander and has such terrible tics.
Yeah,
but he knows it too.
Oh man. Oh yeah. His digressions are. Like they happen all the time. They're great, but they are his talks are like long digressions.
Oh yeah, so hard to get him to stay on point.
Yeah. Anyway,
hit me with your pitch.
Love the guy. Okay, so in my version, it's not the aliens. It's actually like wars are between like nation states on planet Earth.
Oh, okay.
And my reason for doing that was just because I feel like the reveal. I felt like the reveal would hit home more if he's like having to reconcile with the fact that he's killed a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately why I did it. But in this version, it's basically they live in some. We'll say it's America, but what he grows up believing is that America's actually at peace. That there's actually no war going on.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is they're training soldiers. They're training children in these video games as simulations for wartime, so that if America is attacked, then they can defend themselves. And so it's essentially like the same idea. He's going to an academy, and he's selected as one of the brightest. So he goes into this specific facility where he's trained. But in this one, it's more focused. Like the focus is on like video games. The idea is that in the future, fighting is all drone technology. And so a lot of the training is like, how can you manage these simulations? How can you manage like a group of people who are controlling their own group of, armies of robots, and then you can lead them to do that. And in my version, like it progresses much more quickly. So he climbs the ranks, he's doing these simulations, and it's all leading up to this like big final graduating battle that he's got to do. And it's basically, they say that it's modeled after some historic battle where American forces were up against the odds, and we're still victorious. And so he has to do this. And so he does it and he wins, and it's like a crushing defeat. And then he discovers that it actually was real, and that he actually like basically ordered a bunch of robots to go and destroy an entire city full of citizens, like soldiers and like civilians. And so he's now he's angry about this. But the thing is, the way it works is he's completely cut off. So the way I would have it is like he figures this out, but he doesn't tell anybody that he's figured it out. So he's trying to wrestle with how to do this. He knows that his emails are being monitored. It kind of becomes a bit more like dystopian fiction at this point, where it's like, I know the truth and I got to tell everybody about what's going on. Especially because in the world outside, everybody thinks they're at peace. Like they don't actually know that there's actually wars going on, and that all the children that they're bringing in from these schools are actually the ones who are essentially like responsible for all these deaths around the world. And he discovers the reason they do this is because children are the most, in this society, they're the most able of adapting to the new technology. And so that's why they pick children to be the ones who would be the ones playing these video games that would ultimately be used in their state-sponsored violence. So basically what he decides is he's going to try and break out and figure out a way to tell his sister. So because his sister's the one person he can trust, and he's going to tell her what's going on so that the world can figure out like this is really like our country's at war and killing people. And so at that point it kind of becomes like Logan's Run, where he's like trying to escape from the facility. And I haven't worked out all the specifics, but it's basically like he would essentially figure out a way to escape. He goes back home and he tells his sister like, hey, you think like we're actually not at peace. Like all the training, all the simulations we do, those are actual like battles that they get children to control robots that go and destroy destroy cities basically. But at that moment, the Harrison Ford character, like, I don't know, he like steps out behind a corner. Ooh. And it's basically revealed that his sister is...
Jim, I can't let you do that.
Exactly. His sister is actually an actor. His whole family were actually actors. And
oh shit!
The whole thing was actually constructed to see if he would actually betray the military, and he did. And
so like his family was always actors, or it was just
they were always actors. So ultimately what it is the reason he's actually, this is the other reveal, he's actually a genetic baby.
Yeah.
He actually has no biological family.
Oh, shit.
He was actually biologically engineered to be a certain way. But what they discovered was that if they just created children as they wanted them to be, they weren't as effective. They needed them to grow up in some kind of familial environment that had the right amount of discipline and had the right amount of affection in order for them, because they needed children to be trusting enough that they could believe the simulations were actually just simulations.
Yeah. And they had to be, but they also had to be like, had to care about something. Otherwise,
exactly.
You need to have family you care about. Otherwise,
exactly. But they also needed the right amount of discipline. This is where I'm borrowing from Foucault a little bit. He talks about how the family becomes like a model of like the discipline and punish model. So it's essentially like I was kind of borrowing from that. So all these sort of elements of this society essentially work to isolate him. But any sort of community that it creates, it's a community that it has created for its own ends.
Yeah.
So he basically realized, like, that's the final reveal, is that like, oh no, your family is actually like they're actually not.
You've been
real.
Truman showed, bitch.
Exactly. And so the rest of it kind of becomes like a bit of like an absurdist's courtroom drama, where he's kind of like, he's put on trial.
Yeah.
He's put on trial by this state, and basically for basically betraying the state. And so essentially it ultimately It ultimately ends up to him being executed for having basically betrayed, for committing treason, essentially.
Damn, son. That's dark.
But then the final scene is like it's the Harrison Ford character going to a school and them watching like all these cadets and going like that one, we'll select that one, and then the final scene it's mirroring an earlier scene where he's talking to Ender, but it's him with another child, and basically giving him the same speech. You could even go a step
further, because Ender was genetic, like is a genetic baby. You could just have this new child be an exact clone.
Exactly. Oh yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah, it's just another Ender.
Yeah, like the idea is like it's kind of like a nature versus nurture, but the whole society is constructed to create this one individual.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Your idea of like playing games Your idea of playing games to control war reminds me of an episode of South Park that I think was based on Ender's Game. But there's an episode of South Park where Kenny's been playing this game called like Heaven and Hell or whatever. And
is that the PSP one?
Yeah, he gets recruited to play the golden PSP and then has to help Heaven's forces fight Hell or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's so good. It's just like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, such a good. That's a good one.
Oh, that's a classic one. Yeah. Any
last minute thoughts about Ender's Game?
No, that's it. That's all I got to say about Ender's Game.
All I would say is go watch Starship Troopers instead of Ender's Game, or watch both. But seriously, watch Starship Troopers. I think it's a much smarter version of what this is.
It basically, it basically is. Yeah.
Where can people find you?
On my website, www.nathanieldraper.com, or on Letterboxd @DraperNate. Also, well, actually, I guess by the time this goes up on YouTube, it'll have finished. But
it goes up next week.
Okay. Well, Broken Courage, if you happen to be in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, on Wednesday, June 29th, at 6:10 at the French Institute in Phnom Penh, Broken Courage will be playing there as part of the Cambodia International Film Festival.
That's the film that Nate spent the better part of 4 years making. So go watch it. It's really good. I've seen it. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. But if you can't catch it there, you will be notified of future screenings.
Yeah, we'll let you. We'll keep you posted on where you might be able to check that out in the future. You can check out my band Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to dope music. We just released an album. It's really good. Go check it out. And you can stick around here for more conversations about movies, or check out our other channel, the CineCasters, for more scripted content. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Peace.